He's known as Vlad the Impaler, a name soaked in blood, whispered in fear, and etched into the dark corners of European folklore. To some, he was a sadistic tyrant who turned forests into graveyards of impaled bodies. To others, he was a fierce protector of his homeland, the man who dared to defy an empire. But for most of the world, he became something else entirely: Count Dracula, the vampire prince of Transylvania. So who was the real Vlad Țepeș? Was he a man born of medieval cruelty? A product of war and betrayal? Or has history buried the truth beneath centuries of fear, fiction, and myth? This is the story of a boy taken hostage, a prince who bathed his enemies in terror, and a legacy that would live on through one of the most famous monsters in history. In the winter of 1431, in the fortified Transylvanian town of Sighișoara, a child was born into a noble bloodline shadowed by war, politics, and dark oaths. His name would be Vlad, son of Vlad II, Dracula, and his destiny was shaped long before he took his first breath. The world Vlad entered was one of fractured kingdoms and rising empires. Europe was a patchwork of competing powers, and at its vulnerable eastern edge stood the small, rugged principality of Wallachia, also known as Vlaško on the Balkans, a land caught between the Catholic kingdoms of Hungary and Poland and the rising tide of the Ottoman Empire to the south. Vlad belonged to the House of Drăculești, a branch of the ancient Basarab dynasty, rulers of Wallachia. But what made his family's name infamous across generations was not just power, it was the symbol they carried. His father, Vlad II, bore the title Dracula, which means the dragon. This wasn't mere flair, it was a title bestowed upon him when he was inducted into the Order of the Dragon by the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund of Luxembourg. The order was a secretive chivalric society formed in 1408, sworn to uphold Christianity and defend Europe against the Islamic expansion of the Ottoman Turks. Knights of the order wore black capes adorned with a dragon encircling a cross, the emblem of both protection and vengeance. The name Dracula, while prestigious in the West, took on a different tone in the Romanian-speaking lands. In the local language, Drac also meant devil, giving rise to Vlad's own inherited name, Vlad Dracula, the son of the dragon, or the devil. The boy Vlad was not the only child of this legendary house. He had brothers, an older half-brother, Mircea II, and a younger full brother, Radu. Mircea would become a fierce warrior like his father. Radu, by contrast, would walk a far different path, one of charm, submission, and strange alliances. Though born in Transylvania, Vlad's heritage lay in Wallachia, a region marked by brutal feudal politics and violent power struggles. Wallachian princes, or voivodes, rarely ruled in peace. Their reigns often ended in exile, betrayal, or death. The throne of Wallachia was not passed down by primogeniture, but claimed through cunning, diplomacy, and bloodshed. It was against this dangerous backdrop that Vlad's childhood unfolded. In 1436, Vlad's father seized the throne of Wallachia, becoming voivode Vlad II, Dracula. He ruled with a delicate balance, paying tribute to the Ottomans to avoid invasion, while keeping ties with the Hungarian crown to preserve Christian loyalties. But this diplomacy would prove a thin shield. When young Vlad was just around 11 years old, his life would change forever. In 1442, during a shift in Wallachian alliances, Sultan Murad II demanded hostages to ensure Vlad Dracula's continued loyalty. And so, Vlad and his younger brother Radu were taken to the heart of the Ottoman Empire. That moment, the political sacrifice of two sons, would forever define Vlad's psyche. It planted the seeds of mistrust, ruthlessness, and a kind of cold survival instinct that would become his legacy. But before Vlad became the Ottoman prisoner, the ruthless prince, or the blood-drenched legend, he was just a boy, born of dragons, baptized in fire, and destined to rise in a world that crushed the weak. The House of Drăculești gave him his name, but the world he was born into would make him immortal. In the year 1442, the sands of loyalty shifted yet again in Wallachia, and young Vlad Dracula, just a boy of around 11, was caught in the middle of a deadly game of empire. His father, Vlad II, Dracula, had been trying to walk a razor's edge between two titanic forces: Hungary, the bastion of Catholic Europe, and the expanding Ottoman Empire, ruled by the powerful Sultan Murad II. But Wallachia was no more than a buffer state, a pawn in a brutal geopolitical struggle. And pawns are often sacrificed. To guarantee his obedience, the Ottomans demanded a price: hostages. Vlad and his younger brother Radu, likely only 7 or 8 years old at the time, were sent to Edirne, the Ottoman capital, as political prisoners, though the Ottomans preferred the term guests. But this was no safe harbor. For Vlad, it was a gilded cage, a place where every smile concealed a threat, and every lesson came with a price. Edirne was a sprawling, majestic city, a hub of culture, diplomacy, and war. There, within the royal court, Vlad and Radu were taught Turkish, Arabic, and Persian, learned the Quran, and were trained in writing, swordsmanship, and military tactics alongside elite Ottoman pages, including the future Sultan Mehmed II, who would one day be known as Mehmed the Conqueror. The Ottomans believed that by raising noble hostages within their system, they could shape future rulers into loyal vassals. And it often worked. In fact, Radu flourished in this environment. Handsome and charismatic, he caught the attention of the Sultan himself. Some records even suggest a possible personal relationship between Radu and the young Mehmed, one that would later earn Radu the name Radu Cel Frumos, meaning Radu the Handsome. But Vlad was different. He resisted, brooded, and watched. He never forgot why he was there, not as a guest, but as a political prisoner. He saw the power, the wealth, the discipline of the Ottomans, and he respected it. But he also saw the violence, the manipulation, the cold efficiency of a system built on domination. And it seethed within him. Some historians believe that during his time in captivity, Vlad was beaten, possibly even tortured. There's no official record of abuse, but he emerged from the Ottoman court with a deep hatred of the Turks, and perhaps even deeper hatred for those who bowed to them. It was here that Vlad began to understand fear as a weapon, not just a feeling, but a tool of control. While Vlad and Radu remained in captivity, the world they had known unraveled. In 1447, their father, Vlad II, Dracula, was overthrown and killed by rival Wallachian boyars with the backing of the Hungarian regent John Hunyadi, a man who had once been an uneasy ally. Vlad's older half-brother, Mircea II, was captured, blinded with red-hot iron stakes, and buried alive. The House of Drăculești had been butchered. In a matter of months, Vlad went from political hostage to exiled prince, a boy with no throne, no family, and no home. But the Ottomans saw an opportunity. With his bloodline intact and his hatred burning, Vlad became a useful puppet. In 1448, they backed Vlad's first attempt to claim the Wallachian throne. It was a disastrous failure. His reign lasted barely 2 months before he was forced to flee. Yet it was only the beginning. Vlad's years in the Ottoman court did not break him, they hardened him. He had studied the empire from the inside, seen the mechanics of fear and loyalty, witnessed how empires are not built on mercy, but on memory, the memory of what happens to those who disobey. And when he returned to Wallachia, years later, he would put those lessons into practice, turning his country into a fortress, and his name into a threat whispered from Constantinople to Buda. The Ottomans thought they had molded a servant. What they had created was a monster of their own making. The road back to Wallachia was soaked in blood and betrayal, and Vlad was prepared to carve his name into it with iron and fire. After his failed first attempt at claiming the throne in 1448, aided by the Ottomans but abandoned when John Hunyadi returned victorious from Kosovo, Vlad found himself alone, a dispossessed prince with no army, no allies, and no country. For the next few years, he became a wandering figure in the brutal chessboard of Eastern Europe. At times, he sought refuge in Moldavia under the protection of his cousin, Bogdan II, the voivode of the principality. At other times, he lingered near Transylvania, keeping a careful eye on Wallachia's turbulent politics, waiting, always waiting, for the moment to strike. Wallachia during the mid-15th century was a place of chaos, torn between the looming shadow of the Ottomans in the south and the Catholic forces of Hungary in the northwest. Boyar families, the local nobility, wielded immense power and often played rival princes against one another like pieces on a board. They were fickle, treacherous, and greedy, always swearing loyalty to whoever seemed to have the upper hand. This ever-shifting loyalty created a deadly environment where voivodes rarely held power for long. And it was into this world of daggers and whispers that Vlad returned, no longer a boy, but a hardened man forged in the flames of humiliation, exile, and captivity. By 1456, the political stars aligned for Vlad's second, and this time successful, bid for the throne. John Hunyadi, still the de facto leader of Hungary, had launched a military campaign against the Ottomans, culminating in the pivotal siege of Belgrade. During that time, the reigning voivode of Wallachia, Vladislav II, a man who had directly benefited from Vlad's father's downfall, was away, fighting alongside the Hungarians. Seeing the opportunity, Vlad entered Wallachia with a small force, possibly aided by Hungarian approval or at least indifference. The details are murky, but what is known is this: Vlad and Vladislav met in single combat, and Vlad killed him. Perhaps in a duel, perhaps in battle, seizing the throne by blood, not consent. This was not just a military conquest, it was a personal reckoning. Vlad had returned not to plead for the throne, but to take it by force, to demand what was once stolen from his family, and to rewrite his fate with the blade. And once he held the title of Voivode of Wallachia, truly held it, he wasted no time in transforming his realm into a kingdom of control. He understood deeply that power in Wallachia did not rest solely on foreign alliances or noble lineage, it rested on fear. Almost immediately, Vlad began an aggressive campaign to eliminate the boyar class, whom he blamed for the deaths of his father and brother, and for the constant instability that plagued the region. On Easter Sunday, a day of supposed resurrection and peace, he invited hundreds of boyars and their families to a feast at his court in Targoviste. After a polite meal, he had them seized, accusing them of treason and disloyalty. The elderly were impaled, while the younger and stronger were forced to march 50 miles on foot to Panari, where they would build his mountain fortress, stone by stone, until their bodies gave out. Few ever returned. This calculated act sent a chilling message. Vlad ruled not with compromise, but with terror. Over the next several years, he solidified his rule through a mixture of ruthlessness and discipline. He cracked down on crime with unrelenting force. Stories were told of a golden goblet left on display at a public fountain in Targoviste, untouched, unguarded, and never stolen, because people feared what Vlad would do if it disappeared. Thieves, adulterers, and liars were impaled in public squares, their corpses left as a grotesque warning. Foreign merchants who cheated locals were boiled alive or skewered in gruesome displays of justice. Whether all of these stories are true or exaggerated by enemy chroniclers, one thing is certain: Vlad cultivated fear as a governing strategy, not as chaos, but as order. At the same time, he maneuvered Wallachia into a rare position of independence. Though nominally a vassal of the Ottoman Empire, Vlad began to resist tribute payments, and even executed Ottoman envoys who refused to remove their turbans before him, allegedly nailing the turbans to their skulls to ensure they'd never remove them again. These acts did not go unnoticed. Sultan Mehmed II, now the formidable conqueror of Constantinople, would soon turn his eyes toward Vlad. But in these early years, Vlad stood tall, a prince who had risen from captivity and betrayal to forge a domain where law, loyalty, and terror were one and the same. It was a reign born not only of blood, but of vision, the vision of a prince who had seen what empires were made of, and now sought to create his own. Vlad's Wallachia was not merely a state, it was a fortress, a blade in the dark, ruled by a man who had once been a prisoner, and who would never be chained again. By the early 1460s, tensions between Wallachia and the Ottoman Empire had reached a breaking point. For years, Vlad Țepeș had refused to pay the traditional tribute owed to the Sultan. He had executed Ottoman envoys. He had tightened Wallachia's defenses and surrounded himself with fiercely loyal soldiers, many of whom had seen what happened to those who defied him. Still, Sultan Mehmed II, now famous across Europe for his conquest of Constantinople in 1453, was a man of ambition and pride. He would not tolerate defiance from a minor vassal in the Danube frontier. The final spark came in 1461, when Mehmed sent Hamza Pasha, a trusted official, on a diplomatic mission to Wallachia, a mission that Vlad saw as a trap. Vlad ambushed the envoys' company, had Hamza impaled on a tall stake, and killed the rest of the party. Then, in a move as bold as it was suicidal, Vlad launched a surprise winter campaign across the Danube, attacking Ottoman border towns in Bulgaria. It was a brutal, merciless offensive. Entire garrisons were massacred, villages burned, and survivors left skewered on stakes. Vlad claimed to have killed over 23,000 Turks during this campaign, a number preserved in letters he sent to European leaders, including King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, as proof of his commitment to Christendom against the Muslim advance. His cruelty wasn't hidden, it was part of his message, but such provocations could not go unanswered. In the spring of 1462, Sultan Mehmed II personally led a massive army, some sources say over 90,000 men, into Wallachia. This wasn't just a punitive raid, this was a full-blown invasion meant to end Vlad's reign entirely. Vastly outnumbered, Vlad resorted to guerrilla tactics, using his intimate knowledge of the landscape and terrain. He poisoned wells, burned crops, and launched surprise night raids to keep the Ottoman forces disoriented and demoralized. The most infamous of these took place in June 1462, known in chronicles as the night attack at Târgoviște. Under the cover of darkness, Vlad personally led a small band of soldiers deep into the Ottoman camp with the aim of assassinating the Sultan. Though Mehmed survived, the attack struck the wrong tent. The chaos caused was tremendous. Fires raged, soldiers killed each other in confusion, and Vlad's terrifying war cries echoed through the woods. This bold act earned him further admiration from his enemies, even if they cursed his name. And then, just days later, came the sight that would seal Vlad's place in infamy. As Mehmed's army approached the city of Târgoviște, they encountered a nightmare, a forest of the dead. An estimated 20,000 corpses impaled on towering stakes, stretching across the fields. The stench of death hung thick in the air, and the eerie sight broke the morale of many Ottoman soldiers. Eyewitnesses described the gruesome scene. Some bodies were already rotting, others were fresh, and all were displayed in grotesque formations. Horses refused to move forward. Soldiers vomited or prayed aloud. Even Sultan Mehmed, known as the conqueror of Byzantium, is said to have paused and muttered, "It is not possible to deprive of his country a man who does such terrible things and has such a devilish mind." The Sultan decided to retreat, leaving Wallachia smoldering, but unconquered. Yet Vlad's triumph was short-lived. With his lands devastated and resources depleted, he found himself politically isolated. Hoping to secure support from the West, he turned to King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, only to be betrayed and imprisoned in 1462. Corvinus used forged letters, likely created by the Ottomans or even his own court, accusing Vlad of plotting with the Turks. For over a decade, Vlad was held captive in Hungary, during which time his legend grew darker. Stories spread of his cruelty, some factual, others exaggerated by Saxon merchants and political enemies. He roasted children and fed them to their mothers. He had beggars burned alive to solve poverty. He drank the blood of his victims. These tales traveled across Europe, sometimes in horror, sometimes in awe. But back in Wallachia, the political game continued. A new voivode, Radu the Handsome, Vlad's younger brother and an Ottoman ally, now ruled with Turkish backing. Radu was everything Vlad was not: charming, pliable, and eager to maintain peace with the empire. Yet his rule was unstable, and by the mid-1470s, Hungary decided Vlad was once again the right man for the job. After the harrowing victory against the Ottomans in 1462, marked by scorched earth, guerrilla raids, and the horrifying forest of the impaled, Vlad Țepeș emerged as both hero and menace. But what followed was not triumph. It was betrayal, exile, and one of the most controversial imprisonments of the 15th century. Vlad's scorched earth resistance, though initially successful in driving back Sultan Mehmed II's forces, had left Wallachia ravaged and exhausted. His brutal rule and paranoid purges had alienated many of the local boyars, nobles, and while his military tactics were admired by some in Europe, his cruelty was infamous. The Ottomans may have turned away for the moment, but internally, Vlad's support was crumbling. Even worse, he faced a political rival with deep connections, his own younger brother, Radu cel Frumos, Radu the Handsome. Radu had remained in the Ottoman court after their shared childhood as hostages. Unlike Vlad, who emerged hardened and vengeful, Radu had embraced the Ottoman way of life and converted to Islam. He was a favorite of Mehmed II, and now a pliable candidate to place on the Wallachian throne. The Ottomans acted swiftly. With Turkish support and the backing of Wallachian nobles weary of Vlad's iron-fisted rule, Radu invaded Wallachia. Vlad, suddenly without allies in his own land, was forced to flee. He rode north toward Hungary, seeking the support of his former ally, King Matthias Corvinus. This is where betrayal struck. Matthias, under pressure from both domestic political factions and the Saxon merchants of Transylvania, who despised Vlad for his earlier raids and massacres, refused to support his claim. Instead, in a stunning reversal, Matthias had Vlad arrested and imprisoned. The Hungarian king produced a set of forged letters allegedly written by Vlad to the Ottomans, offering to betray Christian Europe and submit to the Sultan. These letters were most likely fabricated either by Ottoman agents or Vlad's many enemies, but they served their purpose. They gave Matthias an excuse to detain Vlad and avoid war with the Ottomans. And so, in 1462, the man who had once terrified the most powerful empire in the world was chained and locked away. Vlad Țepeș spent the next 12 to 14 years in captivity, mostly at Visegrad Castle in Hungary. But even in his imprisonment, his legend continued to grow. Saxon printers in the Holy Roman Empire, many of whom had economic and political grievances against Vlad, began publishing wildly exaggerated pamphlets detailing his alleged atrocities. These were the earliest proto-tabloid tales in Europe, and they painted Vlad as a monster, a devil, a butcher. In one pamphlet, he was said to have impaled over 100,000 people. Others claimed he dined among forests of impaled bodies and drank human blood from golden goblets. Whether myth or propaganda, these stories spread like wildfire. Ironically, while his name was being smeared in print, Vlad was undergoing a transformation in person. According to several Hungarian chroniclers, including those close to King Matthias' court, Vlad began to adopt a more refined and diplomatic demeanor during his captivity. He reportedly married a Hungarian noblewoman, possibly a relative of the king himself, a move that subtly repositioned him from prisoner to potential ally. By the early 1470s, the political tide had shifted again. The Ottomans were pressing deeper into Europe, and Hungary was desperate for a strong leader to defend the southern frontiers. Radu had died in 1475, and Wallachia was once again unstable. After years of lobbying, Vlad was released and supported by Matthias in reclaiming his throne. The final chapter of Vlad Țepeș's turbulent life unfolded like a dark, tragic crescendo, brutal, mysterious, and fitting for a man whose legacy would blur the line between history and horror. After more than a decade of imprisonment in Hungary, Vlad was released and restored to favor by King Matthias Corvinus. The political landscape had shifted dramatically. The Ottoman Empire, more aggressive than ever, had resumed its expansion into southeastern Europe. Wallachia, caught between empires, needed a hardened ruler, someone who could resist the Turks with absolute ruthlessness. Vlad was once again seen as a necessary evil. In 1476, with the backing of Hungary and the military assistance of Stephen the Great of Moldavia, his cousin and sometimes ally, Vlad launched his campaign to reclaim the Wallachian throne for a third time. The throne had changed hands multiple times in the years since his imprisonment. His rival Basarab Lyota, a puppet supported by the Ottomans, had seized control, but lacked the strength and fearsome authority that Vlad's name still carried. Vlad quickly succeeded in ousting Basarab and re-establishing himself as voivode. However, the Wallachia he returned to was not the same land he had once ruled with an iron stake. The nobility remained divided, and his reign had become more symbol than substance. He was surrounded by enemies, both internal and external, and the support from Hungary and Moldavia was tenuous at best. His third reign lasted only a few months. In December 1476, Vlad Țepeș met his end. The exact circumstances of his death remain uncertain and debated even today, steeped in contradiction and legend. One account suggests that he was ambushed and killed in a skirmish near Bucharest by forces loyal to Basarab Lyota. Another theory proposes a cruel twist of fate, that Vlad was mistaken for a Turk by his own men and killed by friendly fire during the chaos of battle. Regardless of how it happened, what followed is well documented and deeply symbolic of his notoriety. The Ottomans recovered his body, or at least his head, and sent it preserved in honey to Sultan Mehmed II, in Constantinople, a grim token of vengeance and closure. For the Sultan, this was personal. Vlad had humiliated him during the 1462 campaign and left behind a grotesque forest of impaled corpses. The presentation of Vlad's head was not only proof of death but an offering to erase a long-standing insult to imperial pride. Vlad's headless body was reportedly buried at the Snagov Monastery, located on an island north of Bucharest, though no confirmed remains have ever been found. A grave marked as his was discovered in the monastery's church in the 20th century, but excavations revealed no body, only the bones of horses. Some believe he was never buried there at all. Others speculate that his burial was intentionally hidden to prevent desecration or veneration. And so the final moments of Vlad Țepeș mirror the rest of his life, a haze of shadows, violence, and unanswered questions. He died not with royal ceremony or heroic farewell, but as a warlord surrounded by enemies, possibly betrayed again, possibly misunderstood even in death. But his legend, that would be eternal. His life would not end with a grave. Instead, it would be resurrected, twisted, and transformed into something that would haunt Western imagination for centuries to come. Because Vlad the Impaler may have died, but Count Dracula was only just being born. History wrote his name in blood, but folklore, literature, and fear etched it into immortality. Though Vlad Țepeș died in 1476, The transformation of a real-life warlord into a supernatural monster began centuries later. The journey from Wallachian prince to Count Dracula, the most iconic vampire in world history, is a tale of myth-making, sensationalism, and literary genius. To understand the origins of the legend, we must return to Vlad's very name. His father, Vlad II, was a member of the Order of the Dragon, a Christian knightly order sworn to defend Europe against the Ottoman Turks. In Latin, dragon was Draco, and so Vlad II was known as Vlad Dracul. His son, Vlad III, became Dracula, or son of the dragon. In modern Romanian, Drac also means devil, adding a sinister layer to the name's legacy. Though contemporaries referred to him as Țepeș, the Impaler, due to his gruesome methods of execution, it was the name Dracula that would survive the centuries, re-emerging not as the name of a prince, but as a predator of the night. Vlad's infamy for impalement, torture, and psychological warfare was not exaggerated, but it was magnified by his enemies. German pamphlets from the late 1400s depicted him as a bloodthirsty tyrant who boiled people alive, nailed turbans to heads, and dined among the corpses of his victims. These woodcuts, printed using the new and growing technology of the printing press, spread terrifying tales of Vlad across Europe. Some claimed he washed his hands in the blood of his victims, others that he drank it. While no credible contemporary source supports the claim of literal blood drinking, the imagery was fertile ground for the imagination, especially in a Europe obsessed with sin, death, and divine punishment. The most pivotal moment in Vlad's transformation into a vampire came over 4 centuries later, with the publication of Bram Stoker's 1897 Gothic novel, Dracula. Stoker was an Irish author with a fascination for Eastern European folklore. While researching for his novel, he came across references to Vlad Dracula and the tales of his cruelty. Though Stoker never traveled to Romania, he found the name compelling and adopted it for his character, but the similarities largely end there. Stoker's Count Dracula is not a Wallachian prince or a medieval warlord. He is a charismatic, shape-shifting, undead nobleman residing in a Transylvanian castle. His connection to the historical Vlad is vague at best, mentioned in passing in the novel. But the name was enough. History and horror fused, and Vlad the Impaler's terrifying deeds became linked, however inaccurately, with vampirism, immortality, and evil. Romania, particularly Transylvania and Wallachia, was already rich with vampire legends before Stoker's novel. The strigoi, undead spirits who rise from the grave to drink the blood of the living, were part of rural superstition for centuries. Tales of villagers digging up corpses and driving stakes through their hearts were not fiction, but documented rituals well into the 19th century. The dark forests, isolated castles, and ancient monasteries of the Carpathian Mountains added atmospheric fuel to the legend. Foreigners were both fascinated and frightened by the region's eerie mystique. In the 20th century, as film and popular media embraced Stoker's vampire, the real Vlad Dracula was permanently fused with fiction. Bela Lugosi's iconic portrayal in the 1931 film Dracula gave the Count his hypnotic accent and aristocratic presence. Later interpretations, from Christopher Lee to Gary Oldman, only deepened the connection between Vlad the Impaler and the undead creature of the night. Tourism in Romania now thrives on this link. Bran Castle, while likely never visited by Vlad, is marketed as Dracula's castle. While many today know Bran Castle as the infamous home of Count Dracula, the truth is far more grounded in history, and a little less supernatural. The castle was originally constructed in 1377, when King Louis I of Hungary granted the Saxon settlers of Kronstadt, modern-day Brașov, the right to build a stone fortress. Its purpose was strategic, to defend the mountain pass between Transylvania and Wallachia from invading forces, especially the rising threat of the Ottoman Empire. Over the centuries, Bran Castle served many roles: a military fortress, a customs post, and later, even a royal residence. But did Vlad Țepeș ever live there? Historically, there is no solid evidence that he ruled from or resided in Bran Castle. At best, it's possible he passed through the area during his campaigns, but the dramatic link between Vlad and the castle came much later, driven not by history, but by tourism and pop culture. After the release of Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1897, Bran Castle, with its dramatic towers, cliffside silhouette, and eerie setting, became a convenient backdrop for the Dracula myth. Even though Stoker never visited Romania and never mentioned the castle by name, it was embraced as Dracula's castle by international audiences looking for a real-world connection to the legendary vampire. Today, Bran Castle stands not just as a medieval relic, but as a symbol of the blending of history and horror, fact and fiction. A place where tourists walk the same halls once guarded by knights, all while imagining the fanged prince who never truly lived there. In the end, Vlad Țepeș was not a vampire. He was a man of flesh and blood, a warrior, a ruler, a product of brutal times. But the myth of Dracula, born from his deeds, his name, and the dark dreams of others, has achieved what Vlad himself never could: immortality. And so the legend lives on, not in tombs or ruins, but in pages, films, and whispers, wherever the night feels a little too quiet, and the moon hangs just a little too full. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, the simple, easy, and free way to support us is by hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel. Don't forget to tap the bell icon. This way you take control of what you watch, instead of letting the algorithm decide for you. See you in the next story.